Mark here, another great Mark 2.0. We got a great guest for you today, Pastor Chadwick Bacon of New Life, West Lakeview in Chicago. Pastor, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, guys. Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, Gordon, I'm going to toss it over to you to start.
All right. I wanted to ask the pastor. I wanted to ask Chadwick. Do you go by Chad or Chadwick?
You can call me Chad. Yeah, that's great.
Okay. Chad, we're living in an era that is very much, some refer to it as a post-Christian era. We live in such a secular world, and you're with a non-denominational church. And I've noticed so many of the older line, what I'll call Protestant denominations, are struggling. I know they are here in Canada. And yet I also notice that quite often that non-denominational churches, and to borrow a line from comedian Tim Hawkins, he said, non-denominational is just Baptist with a cool website, which I thought was a funny line. But I noticed that the non-denominational churches seem to be doing a much better job in terms of attracting people and bringing them in to attend worship and being introduced to Jesus Christ. And I just was wondering on your thoughts on this whole, because Christianity is so divided. We have the Catholic and the Protestant. Within the Protestant, we must have 1,000 denominations. So why non-denominational?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Let me just give you like a glimpse of our church. That way, when I answer it, it'll make more sense. But sure. We, as Mark was saying, I'm a pastor in Chicago. Our church is called New Life Community Church in West Lakeview. So like kind of the unique thing we have is we are one of 27 locations that's together as one church, but we meet in different neighborhoods. So our ministry is able to be strengthened by people with perspectives that are shaped by the neighborhood they live in and the people they reach. And then with us, we're in West Lakeview. And so we really seek to reach that neighborhood. And I think that that image you're using about just kind of struggling denominational churches and kind of that new energy growth of non-denominational, I think there's a good and a bad about it. The good I see, so our church in West Lakeview, we have a building on our corner right across from this beautiful park. And the unique thing is this building there's been a church on this corner since 1892. So for over 130, almost 130 years, there's been a church here in this neighborhood. And that church that started was a Baptist church. It was called Galilee Baptist Church. And so in the year 2000, they were struggling to, like you were saying, find that growth in young people who were moving into the neighborhood. A lot of young families were moving in here, and they were just struggling to make that connection with them. So the kind of the head elder at that time, his name is Chuck McCorder. He just said, if we keep going down this path, we feel like this is going to close, and we want church to be here. We want church to reach here. And so did really this radical approach where they ended up calling New Life and saying, we see like young people are flocking to your church. We want that to happen here. Can we like merge together in a way to start that, and so we did that in the year 2000. And so for over 22 years now, there's been a church that is kind of having that influx of young, newer life, reaching the neighbors, the neighborhood. Mark, I think you came here back in 2005. So you were probably part of that, that young kind of influx of people who were attending.
And what's funny about me, and Gordon doesn't know this, is I found the church because I posted, this was back when Craigslist was safe, not that I'm saying it isn't, but I posted on Craigslist. I had been came over from West Michigan. I posted on Craigslist, does anyone want to do a Bible study? All different denominations. And one of the guys from your worship, I doubt he's still there. His name's Dave. He came to the Bible study, and this is, we met over at a coffee house over by Belmont and Broadway, which is not really an area where you go and have a Bible study. But from then and this was early on, I moved in August of 2007. So it would have been right when I arrived around, and Dave invited me there. And it was just such an inviting experience at New Life.
That's amazing. Dave, what was his last name?
I couldn't, it's so long ago, you know what I mean? So.
Being non-denominational, we've all seen the news that just came out of the Southern Baptist Convention, even hearing about it up here in Canada. And I'm just wondering, does being non-denominational, does it kind of remove you from that baggage? Because I think you mentioned, there are a lot of people have had negative experiences in church. It has happened. Churches are imperfect human creations. And, and someone will say, well, I went to an RCA church, or I went to a CRC church, or I went to a Lutheran, and I did, and they think that's the church. And then when you say, look, we're non-denominational, it sounds inviting, I think, to people, whereas it's not just Lutheran, it's not just Reformed, it's not just whatever.
Yeah, I think, well, one thing I think, though, denominational churches, the richness of the history they have is at times a beautiful thing, right? Where it started and how it grew and kind of what binds people together. But on the flip side, it can just be a negative thing as well, because there's been so many things that have been carried through that history that might not have been acknowledged, or kind of like sacred cows that are carried through in that aspect. And I think, in non-denominational churches, I feel like there is less of those kind of sacred cows that are carried through. Our church specifically, the neighborhood we're in Lakeview, is very transient. So kind of the average kind of lifespan of people in our church can range from 3 years to 8 years. And we see a lot of turnover in that period. And so the nice thing about that is it kind of feels like, hey, we're not carrying a lot of those sacred cows of this is how we always have done things. It feels like you can pivot a lot more. On the flip side, though, it's frustrating because you want people to carry the DNA of your church, or carry we've lived through this. Now we want to pour into these younger people. We kind of miss a lot of that overchange. And so I think you're right. I think non-denominational churches can be attractive in the regards of, oh, this is not really bound to this older thing. It can change. But I think, as I said before, there's good and bad. I feel like the bad, though, we're also are seeing, right, with a lot of these strong leaders who have started these non-denominational churches and then have fallen, whether it be, whatever sin that have outed them in that regards. And so I think the warning I always carry as a pastor in a non-denominational church is don't put yourself on a pedestal. Don't make yourself the focal point of the church. Because if you try to grow the church based upon your personality or based upon whatever your strong skill is, then it's all going to be focused on you. But I've really felt, especially over the last few years, how do you build a strong team around you to do that work? If it's all on you, it's going to fall on you, and probably you're going to fall. But if it's all on your team, like elders, leadership team, whoever it is, then they are helping not only keep you accountable, but helping shape that church culture to be God-centered, not you-centered.
Right. Yeah, you got to be rooted in Christ.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, the church is an outcropping. It's Now, you mentioned this turnover that's going on. As a faith leader, you're up on the pulpit every probably 4 out of 5 Sundays. And I've often wondered, and it's a question I've never asked a pastor, because I've tended to go to older line churches where there's not a lot of people coming in who are newer to the church, and not a lot of people who are newer to the faith. Part of your job, I would imagine you would say, is something of developing disciples. You want discipleship, and yet, everyone sitting in the pew. I don't know how many people come to your church on a Sunday, 200, 300, 400, whatever the number is. Everyone's at a different walk, and that's got to be a real challenge as a faith leader. You want to meet people where they're at, but everyone isn't at the same spot. So how do you be, how do you spread the gospel? How do you evangelize while at the same time dealing with more mature people who are, digging deeper and deeper, who have said the sinner's prayer, but now, they're getting deeper and deeper into their faith?
Yeah, you're right. That's a tension in preaching. I think, the easy answer is all of us struggle in our discipleship to become more and more like Christ. So that's the call every Sunday, right? Like, how are we dying to ourselves in a sense to become more and more like Christ in our lives? And so I see it as like a sliding scale of, the people who are this far in their faith walk, and they need to be challenged probably more on evangelism than anything else. That's probably something they struggle with the most. And so calling people to share their faith will be something that is going to be a challenge to someone who's longer walking in the faith. For younger Christians, or maybe not followers of Christ at all, you're trying to introduce them, in my mind, to the narrative of what the Bible is all about, the narrative of the gospel. We're formed in God. We fall away from that. We're on this search to try to reconcile that relationship. We keep failing. So God sends his son to really cause that reconciliation through his life, death, and resurrection, right? So every Sunday, you want to, in some sense, speak to the lowest common denominator. So when I'm talking about any Bible story, I don't assume people know what I'm talking about. Like if you're in a church with a lot of like Christians who have been Christian for a while, you can say like, and like Gideon, and assume they know the story of Gideon. When I preach, I know if I'm going to refer to Gideon, I have to explain the story of Gideon, because there's going to be a lot of people in our congregation who have no idea who that is. So you kind of have to like press into those details of saying, oh, this is what this story is. Maybe you don't know it. I'm going to tell it to you right now, instead of kind of assuming everyone's in this same pot, but you never want to neglect your longer followers of Christ, because they need it. They need that discipleship as well.
Yes.
They need that.
We all need encouragement. I've taken now to, when I'm at break on lunch, testifying is a hard thing. Evangelizing is a hard thing. So what I've simply done at work is I've taken to just simply pulling my Bible out, and I read. I'm making my way through the Gospels again, and just as a way. And everyone, I must have been asked the question in the past week 5 times. What are you reading? Greatest book ever written. So actually, greatest 66 books ever written.
Yeah, that's right. And the other thing I found is I really like returning to challenging people to the basic spiritual disciplines in following God, because I feel like no matter where you are in your walk, that's something that we need to go back to over and over again. So I feel like many years I will just do really through our sermons kind of calls to action, whether it's how is your prayer life? How's your scripture reading life? How often are you taking time to fast in your walk with God? Like, to go through these spiritual disciplines, because they're practical to people, to say, in order to upkeep your life with seeking to follow after Christ, you need to invest in it. So prayer is this investment in that relationship of communication. Scripture is investment in really receiving God's word into your life. And so I've felt like returning to those is teaching newer followers of Christ, or maybe not Christians at all, how to do that. And older ones as a reminder of, hey, have you fallen off track with this? Because it's vital to our relationship with God.
And Mark, when you were going there, Mark, how many people were attending back in 2005?
How many would you say, Chadwick? Like, was it 400 or something?
Yeah, 2005, 2007 was like probably the highest kind of like church attendance on like in Lakeview. What happened after that was we started planting a lot more locations in the neighborhoods around us. And so we were sending out people from our core congregation to Lincoln Park or to Humboldt Park, like sending them out. And so we started to lose more of that core congregation because we were sending out our really good leaders to start a new church, because that was the investment we wanted to, how do we invest in that community? So that when Mark was here, that was, probably some of the like most robust, really healthy, like high level leadership we've had. And yet we've gone through a lot of different iterations after that. And that's kind of the fun, unique thing about being in a transient neighborhood. Also, when you're sending out people, you kind of get to put new people into those roles and say like, all right, you're up now. You got to grow into this leadership role.
You're using the word transient. And when I hear the word transient, the first thing that pops into my head, I think of flop houses. And you're in a wealthy, affluent area of Chicago. It doesn't sound, I know how you mean transient. It just, it's people basically moving in and progressing, moving to an even nicer neighborhood.
That's right. We often view ourselves as the gateway either to the suburbs or the gateway to, Western Michigan or Ohio. Like, so usually in the lifespan of people who live here, they kind of spend their downtown years and then they settle with their family in our neighborhood. And then they move further out to the suburbs or to a different place. So the transient happens because of schools in Chicago and kind of those people saying, oh, our kids are in school now. We want to go live in a place where they can be in the same school all of the time instead of like having to switch.
Now for Chicago gets a bad rep, as a city, like it's very dangerous and not a place to raise a family. And Gordon and I, we had Tommy Doles on, he brought a great point. Well, some people like what Chicago has to offer as far as diversity and, everything else. Explain what is the city of Chicago is really like and not what the media is portraying it as.
Yeah. And, if you talk to longtime Chicagoans, there's a sensitivity to being used as a negative illustration all the time, and honestly, being a Chicagoan, your heart grieves a lot. You see, obviously Chicago is kind of connected often with shootings and murders, and your heart grieves because you pray for the areas of the city that are mainly affected by that. And I have very good friends, and this is one of the like awesome things about our church. I have very good friends that live in those neighborhoods that are more directly affected than my neighborhood is. And so I get the like face-to-face telling me the story of what's happened, not reading it through some news source. And I know my friends who invest their lives and park their families in what would be considered more dangerous neighborhoods, but they feel that call of God to say, we're here as peacemakers. We're here to help care for families. We're also here because this is our neighborhood and we've invested in this. And so, I think the call of being a follower of Christ is that missionary mindset, right? Where am I sent to? And so I think with sometimes how Chicago is talking is talked about or portrayed in the media is like, oh, we should flee from that place. But I think often the call of Christ is to actually, you should enter into that place and see how you can carry Christ into it and begin to transform it. And so we have a parachurch organization that's part of our church called New Life Centers, and they live into that. They do one-on-one mentoring with young men and young women, and just amazing stories of how they've been with some of these kids since they've been in, first, second grade, all the way through being first generation people in their family to go to college and to begin to break the chains of generations that have been in front of them. And so I think our heart is always, how can we invest and make this better? And the reality of my life on the north side is I don't often live in fear. There's our violence is not very high. And in a sense, you notice that and your heart grieves for the neighborhoods that feel it more tangible than I do. So yeah, it's hard when people use that as an example and you're like, that's the numbers and the stories can tell you one thing, but if you go there, that's not the truth,
Well, now during the past 2 years, I've looked at the past 2+ years as having been, people's eyes are opening up to the Christian faith, just because of the challenges that are happening in our world. People are looking and they're saying, this world doesn't work. And they're looking for answers. And one of the places they're turning to are churches. What has it been like? And I don't know what the situation is in Illinois. In Ontario, Canada, our churches were shut down for months at a time where attendance was verboten. Mm-hmm. What was it like in Illinois? What have been the challenges? What have been the opportunities with the pandemic?
Yeah, we were in March of 2020, we started to go like online church right away. And that probably lasted till about late July of 2020. And then in August, we were able to do like smaller in-person gatherings. The struggle for me was online church. I'm glad it was a tool we were able to use, but I don't really feel like church is meant to be online. It's the call of the church is a physical gathering, a presence, mainly because not only are you worshiping together, that's how community is formed in person. And so, I was glad we were able to do it, but super glad when we were able to be back in person again. Our neighborhood erred more on the side of safety, where people were very cautious to gather a lot. And we still feel that, I think, in some regards. But I think you're right. I think there's also been then a spiritual curiosity of people to say, things are falling apart. Where do we find purpose? And I think for my wife, Brooke, and I, really the benefit is our neighborhood is pretty close to one another. We're friends with a lot of our neighbors who don't come to our church and really don't go to church. And so just being able to have those conversations with them to begin to press into that spiritual curiosity has been really fruitful, and we found has really deepened our relationship. And so in that sense, really deepened our witness to them, and being able to speak to those hard areas of life. And so I think we're still on this tail end of struggling a little bit, but I really do see in the next couple of years of more of that turn towards, hey, I'm feeling pretty lost. How do I find purpose again? And so I'm excited about that possibility. And I think the church always tends to grow after crisis, when people are looking for something more,
Now, I'm assuming, I shouldn't assume, but I'm going to.
Yeah.
How did you feel? There are some pastors in the United States who are quite out there, and in Canada too. We've had, I believe it's now, we're up to 5 pastors have been thrown in jail.
Wow.
For conducting church. I even and others have been fined hundreds of thousands of dollars for not erring on the side of caution, not going the other way. And Pastor Greg Locke, I believe, is one down in Florida. Pastor Rob McCoy out in Thousand Oaks, California, where they opened their doors and you saw people coming in. Did you have any inclination toward?
Chicago was very serious about the rules, no doubt about that. And, I feel like we're definitely really far past that now. Like there's no going back to what kind of those outlines were. Our leadership at our location, for the longevity of our witness to our neighbors, just because we're more of a neighborhood church that really builds on those relationships with our different organizations in our neighborhood. So I think we just felt the conviction of we want to respect what our civic leaders' decisions are, because ultimately we want to work alongside those civic leaders. And so we pretty strictly followed that, but it didn't really limit what we were able to do. And so we didn't feel like we had to make that decision of this is limiting us. It felt like we were still really able to operate our ministry how we needed to. So thankful that we were able to do that. But it is hard in a lot of these situations for very large churches. Yeah, that was a real struggle. I can't imagine not being able to do those gatherings. Our largest location did a lot of parking lot gatherings because outside it didn't matter, and they were able to get away with it.
Well, just my own personal experience, the town I was in, all the churches were shut down, and I found watching a church service over a Facebook stream or whatever, to me, that was akin to trying to draw heat from that fire log television station at Christmas time. And a Pentecostal church in town opened up to outdoor worship on their lawn. So I said, okay, I'm a Reformed Pentecostal.
That's awesome.
And and that's something I like about the non-denominational aspect is you get rid of those walls. At the end of the day, we're reading the same book, we're following the same Lord, and the doctrinal differences. Christians, we're horrible. We love to circle the wagons and then shoot in at each other. We love to tear each other up. I wanted to ask you. I can't tell with the baseball cap on, but thank you for wearing it cap side
I'll
forward.
do this.
Yeah. How old are you?
I'm 35.
Okay, so you're a young man.
Yeah.
When did you hear the calling?
Oh, so my story is everybody's story is unique to them, but my story to calling, it feels something that always struck me as I'm confused why God is placing this on my shoulder, not clear hey, I've always wanted to do this. So I actually grew up, my father was a pastor in the northwest side of Chicago. But his legacy, his faithfulness did not fully be lived out. And so when I was a junior in high school, he had to leave his pastoral position. Him and my mother's relationship really hindered, and really he never really turned his heart back towards that. And so kind of going through that experience, the unique thing is that I found more shelter and more love in the church during a time of hurt, and it attracted me more to it. So being a pastor's son and seeing the weight of ministry, seeing kind of the dual life of what my dad professed on a Sunday and how he lived his life Monday through Friday, it could have set me up to be very out on the church or to feel like, oh, this is not for me. But God kept pressing on me that it was something I was supposed to do. And even feeling that call, I felt this call to go to Moody Bible Institute, the local school in Chicago. And I didn't get accepted right away. So I was kind of like, oh, I'm confused. Like I feel this calling, but I'm not accepted. And then I got in the day before school started. They had an opening. And so that's how my story has kind of been, like God calling me to follow him and me not being sure what that meant. And so even, I'm not even sure Mark knows the story, but even how I got to New Life in Lakeview, I just started attending here in 2010. So about 22 years ago, or 12 years ago. And
you study theology, not math.
yeah, not math. That's right. So just starting attending here and then forming a really close relationship with Pastor Kevin, the pastor here, and feeling really drawn to, I want to be a part of this church. And so I was working at a pharmacy in the neighborhood and just like helping out around the church. And then I took like a managerial kind of office manager job here at the church and was still working at the pharmacy. And during that time, Pastor Kevin felt God nudging him to prepare the next leader. He didn't really know why. And so he really spoke clearly to me and he said, Chad, I think God's calling you to take over being a pastor here. And I was really confused, like how this would work, And so he prepared for a year for me to take over, not sure why God was prompting him to do this. And at the end of that year, he actually was involved in a hit and run car accident on a scooter and suffered a traumatic brain injury. And it totally curtailed his life. And he's still one of, my mentors and one of my heroes of faith. But God prompting him to prepare me to take over meant that the church had this really smooth transition to a pastor being there in the midst of tragedy and heartache and hardship. And it was very hard. It's still hard to talk about at times. But just I feel like how God has always used me to say, I'm going to tell you where to go. You just have to be faithful and go there. And that door opens when I least expect it.
Now you bring up tragedy and what happened to your associate, which is gut-wrenching. Accidents never end well when you're on a scooter. But that's something I don't think a lot of people understand in terms of ministry. Is a profession, as a calling. But it's hard on a marriage. It's hard on your personal life. The people, no one comes to you when things are going great. Pastor, I prayed, and they'll tell you on Sunday, but it's breakups. It's children who are abusing drugs. It's a lot of human tragedy. And it weighs down on faith leaders. How are you? Your wife must be an absolute. She's got to be a rock.
Yeah, she's the best. She's like, she does all the stuff for our church and doesn't get paid for it. So she's amazing. So it's my wife Brooke and I, and then we have three kids. Abe is 8, Zach is 7, and our daughter Frances is 5. So we kind of have a lot of little kids running around, which is a lot of fun. But I've found after the first couple of years of being a pastor, especially stepping into the shoes of someone I looked up to so much, I could feel burnout really on the edge. I felt like I could not take time off, that I had to be present all the time, kind of that like I kind of viewed myself really honestly more valuable than I needed to. And because of that, I was pushing myself to the limits, and it was during one of these times where I could just feel that edge coming, that, my favorite author is Eugene Peterson. He wrote a lot of books, but one of them is A Long Obedience in the Same Direction. And it was in his writing, he writes a lot about pastoral ministry. He was a pastor for many years. And in it, he wrote, rediscovering the Sabbath in your life and the necessity of carving out that time to say, you need that day. You need that day where you're communing with God and you're taking a rest, and it was during that time that I started to just really form in my life of 24-hour Sabbath. And that's how I've really found that ability to be present to people in emergency, but also knowing when that day comes, all right, that's 24 hours where I'm out, I'm gone. I don't answer phone calls, I don't answer emails. It's that separate, I'm putting that rest I need so I can be present in it. And so that's the routine I've found helped me.
I loved your answer. I'd never thought of it myself in terms of those, the Sabbath is a day of rest. Mm. And so often we think of it as a day devoted to worship.
Yeah.
But we have a good Father, and he has prescribed us, guidelines, rules, if you like. I prefer to use the term guideline, that are for our benefit. And you need a day of rest. He took one, you need one.
Yeah, and the beautiful thing is in the creation story in Genesis 1, 1-2, the only thing that is described as being holy is the Sabbath. Yes. So when people say, I can't take a break, you tell them they're missing their holy time. They're missing their time to rediscover that holiness, that 24-hour break.
I can see why Mark enjoyed attending the church, and I'm so glad he reached out to you. How long did you go there, Mark?
I went there about 2 years. And one thing, closing out the podcast, one thing that I wanted to say is I really thought of Pastor Kevin as a mentor, because I had gone to Chicago not only for the love of the city and the love of the sports teams, as horrible as they were at the time, outside of the White Sox, because they won the title.
The Bulls are pretty good, right?
Well, this was 2005 to 2007. So those Bulls, we're not talking about.
To a guy from Toronto, where our hockey team hasn't been out of the first round, hasn't won a Stanley Cup my entire life.
Well, you need to become a Blackhawks fan. There you go. Yeah.
Don't talk to me about sports.
Anyways, I really thought of him as a mentor because he knew I was into acting. He didn't, and he tried to, assist me and, oh, you should meet this person or you should meet that person. Just a real down to earth. And it was so inviting to invite people to church, because I had a friend where I worked. She came in all the time. She was Ethiopian and she moved to Houston, and she's like, I'm looking for a church. I said, come to New Life. And as soon as she got there, she felt welcome. She's like, this is just like my church in Houston. And that's what I want to say about New Life and closing out the podcast. So,
yeah, Pastor Kevin is an amazing connector. And I really had that heart for helping people where they're at to discover those connections. Yeah.
All right. Well, if you're in Chicago and looking for a church to attend, definitely drop by. How many services do you have and what time are they?
So we are right now doing one service at 10 a.m. But we have 27 locations, and I'd recommend all of them. They have different pastors at those locations, but they're all my good friends and love them all dearly. So find that one that fits you.
All right.
Hey, really appreciate it. Yeah.
Thank you, guys.